Let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine yourself transported not into a quiet, candlelit medieval dream but into the rough, cold reality of what trying to sleep actually meant for most people in the Middle Ages. It's a winter night in the year 1347, and you are lying on a straw-filled mattress that crunches slightly every time you shift your weight. The room is pitch dark, save for the dim orange flicker of the hearth fire, which must remain lit all night to keep the damp and chill at bay. You are not alone. In fact, privacy is not a concept you've ever experienced. Your siblings are beside you, your parents perhaps only a few feet away, and below the wood-iron platform of your sleeping area, two goats huddle for warmth. They breathe loudly and occasionally grunt in their sleep. Their warmth is welcome, even if their smell is not. Your home is a single-room cottage. It's thick with smoke that never quite makes it out the chimney. The walls are wood and wattle, patched and cracked. Wind whistles softly through the gaps, and somewhere in the thatched roof, mice scurry. The scent of burning peat, damp wool, and old stew lingers. You are exhausted, but you are not at ease. This is bedtime in a medieval peasant home. You do not sleep once per night, in one long peaceful stretch. That idea hasn't even been imagined yet. Instead, your sleep is broken into two parts, what modern historians call segmented sleep. You go to bed shortly after nightfall, perhaps 6 or 7 in the evening. You'll sleep for 3 to 4 hours your first sleep. Then, as if by some quiet internal rhythm, you wake up. Maybe it's close to midnight. You're alert, even slightly refreshed. No one is surprised by this. It's normal. Everyone you know does this. You might sit up, tend the fire, check on the animals, or relieve yourself outside in the freezing dark. Maybe you whisper quietly to someone else in the room who's also awake. Some people pray. Others smoke herbs or chew dried roots. Some couples use this time for intimacy. And some go outside to think, the in-between time. Known as the watch, is considered a sacred window. Then, eventually, you will drift back into your second sleep until dawn. But even these two halves of sleep are fragile. You may be awoken by the church bells calling from midnight prayers, especially if you live near a monastery. You may be woken by hunger since dinner was a bowl of thin pottage hours ago, or by the pain in your back from lying on uneven straw. You may also be woken by fear. Medieval people believed the night belonged to demons. The dark hours were thought to be full of spirits and visitations. That's why many households kept religious charms or relics near the bed. A cross of ash might be drawn on the door. Prayers to Saint Michael, the protector of sleepers, were whispered every night. You might keep a wooden amulet under your blanket, or tuck a sprig of rosemary beneath your mattress to ward off nightmares. If your dreams are particularly troubling, you might consult the village priest or the old woman with strange herbs and stranger knowledge who interprets your visions. To dream of falling meant you were being tempted. To dream of fire meant divine punishment. Dreams were not random. They were warnings, and so sleep becomes not just something to do, it becomes something to survive. Even where and how people sleep is unusual by modern standards. Beds are precious. If you're a peasant, your bed is likely a woven sack of straw or feathers laid directly on a wooden frame, perhaps slightly raised from the dirt floor. There are no sheets. You sleep in your clothes. Lice are common. Fleas are expected. You rarely wash your bedding. If you're slightly wealthier, maybe you have a curtain to close off your sleeping space. Maybe you share a bed only with your spouse, instead of your whole family. But even among the nobles, privacy is rare. Beds are often shared between servants, guests, even officials traveling together. There are documented cases of strangers sharing a bed at inns. and not thinking much of it. A bed is just a place to lie down, not a personal sanctuary. In towns and cities, sleep gets even more complicated. The streets are loud, even at night. Watchmen patrol with lanterns and staves, calling out and warning of fire. The air smells of ash, horse manure, and fish. If you live above a shop or near a tavern, voices and footsteps echo through thin walls. Burglaries are common. You sleep lightly, and you wake often. Some city dwellers build small box beds, wooden compartments with doors to shut themselves away from noise and rats. These are warmer. True, but they're dark, cramped, and others, still, they feel safe, if you're wealthy. Sleep is a ceremony. Your servants prepare your bedchamber before you enter. They warm bricks by the fire and place them at your feet under the covers. They light incense to sweeten the air. They may even inspect the mattress for insects. The bed itself is grand four-poster, with heavy curtains to trap heat and keep out prying eyes. But even for nobles, fears of the night remain. Many sleep with weapons nearby. Some kings even kept bodyguards in their room. There were rumors of assassination in the dark, of poison slipped into war mill, of curses whispered at the foot of the bed. Sleep was never truly safe, and yet, amid all this discomfort and fear, people did sleep. Somehow, they adapted. They accepted the cold and the creatures and the dreams. Children learned early not to cry in the dark. Wives learned to soothe their husbands' nightmares. Men learned the sounds of a rat versus the sound of a man outside the door. And everyone, no matter how tired, listened for the first bell of morning calling them to work, to prayer, or to labor. There was no snooze button, no soft mattress, no morning latte. There was only the fire, the frost, and the feeling that sleep-like life was uncertain, broken, and full of mystery. And so, as you drift now into your own quiet slumber, know that your bed is a luxury beyond the dreams of most people in history. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the long sleep of time, a medieval villager is watching from across the centuries, wondering how you sleep so deeply, so silently, and so alone. Close your eyes and imagine the slow rhythm of bells ringing across the foggy hills of 11th century Germany. The year is 1106, and you are a child, not more than 8 years old, standing at the threshold of a stone monastery tucked away in the Rhineland countryside. Your family, of noble status but humble means, has brought you here not for punishment, but for something they call devotion. You've been given to God, to the church, to a life of silence, ritual, and enclosure. This is your new home, permanent, isolated, and absolute. You are not an orphan. Your parents still live. But in the custom of the time, they've decided to dedicate you to a religious life. An act that brings spiritual merit to the family and perhaps prestige. Your name is Hildegard, and though the world sees you as a quiet little girl with a sickly body and an overly sensitive disposition, you are already something else entirely. You are a child of visions. From as early as you can remember, you have seen shimmering lights dancing at the edges of your sight. They are not ordinary lights, but brilliant, luminous patterns that move and hum with a strange kind of order. Sometimes you hear a voice accompanying them, soft, not frightening, but firm. You have not told many people. Only a trusted few know. These visions are your secret. They do not come to you in dreams, but in waking moments, in half-light and silence. You do not understand them yet, only that they are real. Now, in your new life, you find yourself enclosed in a cell. It is not a prison, though it may feel like one. The stone walls are high and thick. The windows are narrow slits, more like arrows than openings. You are not alone. With you in the anchor hold is Jutta von Sponheim, a noble woman of deep religious fervor who will become your teacher and guardian. The two of you live in confinement together, joined occasionally by a serving girl, and cut off from the outer world except through a small window to the chapel and a grating where food is passed. The days pass in stillness, structured by the rule of Saint Benedict. Each hour is assigned a purpose. You wake before dawn for vigils, chant psalms, attend prayers, eat little, speak less, and write or study by the dim light of a single candle. Your sleep is not long or uninterrupted. The monastic schedule demands that you rise in the dark hours of the night, sometimes round midnight, sometimes closer to 2 in the morning, for matins the solemn office of psalms and chants. This pattern will continue for the rest of your life. You begin to understand that rest in this world is not for comfort. It is not indulgence. It is simply a pause between prayers. You learn to fall asleep quickly and wake without complaint. You sleep in a wool habit, on a straw mat, in a room that is never truly warm. The air smells of beeswax, damp stone. You do not miss your old bed or the comfort of your home. Those things belong to another life. A life that no longer concerns you. In this world, everything is shaped by discipline. Even dreams are filtered through the lens of Scripture. Still, your visions continue. And more, they come to you in the stillness after midnight prayer, when the fire has burned low and the walls seem to breathe with ancient memory. The lights appear in bursts of color: blue, gold, white, and in their glow you see forms, circles within circles, eyes in flame, towers and trees and angels with wings of emerald. They are not terrifying, not like nightmares. They are clear, intense, full of meaning, though you cannot yet explain it. You wonder if others see them too. Jutta teaches you to write, to read the Psalms, to sing the offices in Latin. But no one teaches you what to do with the visions. That part, it seems, is yours alone. Over time, you come to believe what the voice in the light seems to suggest, that these images are not from within you, but from outside you, that they come from the divine. You are not sleeping. You are awake and still. They come. It is in this strange place between the physical and spiritual, between wakefulness and rest, that you begin to find your identity. The enclosure is not merely a place of confinement, but of gestation. Here, your soul unfolds. You are not yet Hildegard of Bingen, the famed visionary, writer, and composer. You are still a girl in the shadows of the cloister, but already. Your nights are not like other people's nights. Already. Your sleep is not truly sleep. Already. Your soul walks paths that others cannot follow. You grow older, and the visions grow stronger. Sometimes they come in the middle of the day. Sometimes just after matins, when the monastery lies quiet and the sky is still dark outside. There is a moment in those early hours when your mind seems sharper than usual, as if the thin veil between heaven and earth is lifted just enough. The world is hushed. The other nuns are asleep, or quietly praying in their cells. The cold has not yet burned off the walls. And in this thin silence, the visions rise again, sometimes with sound, sometimes with overwhelming light, always with clarity. You begin to realize something important. Sleep itself is not a barrier to revelation. In fact, it might be the door. It is not the sleep of dreams, but the half-sleep of holy silence where God speaks later. You will write that your visions did not come from the imagination, but from what you called the shadow of the living light. You will insist that you never lost consciousness, never left your body, never dreamed these things in the way others do. No, they came while you were awake, but inward, still, but listening. In the anchor hold, Sleep is brief and restless. You learn to live without it, and as the years pass, your reputation begins to grow. Other women join the cell. Jutta dies, and you are appointed magistra, the spiritual mother of the small community. Even then, you do not reveal the fullness of your visions, not yet. You are cautious. The world is not kind to women who speak too loudly, or too strangely, especially not about the things that come in the night. But the visions do not stop, and slowly, quietly, you begin to understand. They must be written down, and when they are, the world will finally hear what you've seen in silence all these years. It is the year 1141, and you are no longer a girl, but a woman of 42, standing in the stillness of a scriptorium lit only by the dull flicker of beeswax candles. The cloister around you has changed over the years. Jutta is gone. The anchor hold that once imprisoned your childhood has grown into something else, something wider and deeper, more alive. Women now come to you not just for guidance, but for a purpose. You are Hildegard, and they call you Magistra, but something even heavier has begun to stir in your spirit. For decades you have hidden your visions. You've told only a few. You feared what they might say, that you are mad, unstable, dangerous. Women are not meant to receive prophecy. Women are not meant to speak the divine. But it is no longer possible to stay silent. The visions have grown louder, more urgent. They press upon your soul like water behind a dam, and if you do not write them, you will surely drown. And so, with the help of a monk named Volmar, who acts as your scribe and confidant, and a young nun named Rigidus, who becomes your closest companion, you begin to record what you have seen. The first great work is called Sivias Know the Ways. It is not just theology. It is image, light, and revelation. The strange thing is that it doesn't feel like writing. It feels like listening. The visions speak. You obey, but they do not come on command. Often, they arrive when the world is at rest, when the bells have rung Compline, when the final candle has been snuffed, and the night lies heavy over the cloister. You lie in your narrow bed, cloaked in wool, the hard straw beneath you crackling like old parchment. The room is cold. There is no fire. Your feet ache. Sleep comes slowly. Then, sometimes suddenly, it shatters. Your eyes snap open in the middle of the night. You do not know why. There is no noise. No one has called your name, yet you feel it in your bones are pulling, a piercing brightness rising in your chest. You rise without lighting a candle. There is no need. The room itself seems to glow. In this moment, it is as though time folds in on itself. The stars are still above, but you do not feel them. The walls vanish. All is motion and color. Circles. Fire. A voice that is not your own, speaking truths you cannot have known. The sleep you lost does not matter. You are not tired. You are a vessel. This is not dream. This is command. It is not only at night. Sometimes it happens at midday, during Mass or while copying texts. But the strangest ones come between the waking and the sleeping, when the body is heavy and the mind is loose. When your head nods, your eyes flutter, and your thoughts drift like mist over water. That is when the message slips through, like a thread pulled through cloth, like a whisper in the bones. It is not rest, but it is revelation, and you begin to understand that sleep is not a retreat from the world, but a crossing into another kind of attention. Sleep and waking blur. The boundaries dissolve. In this space, the divine can speak more clearly. You wonder sometimes if the visions are meant to interrupt your rest, or if perhaps true rest is not found in sleep at all, but in the surrender to what is beyond it. Still, your body is frail. You often suffer from what you call the great pain, a sort of paralysis that comes without warning and leaves you weak for days. Your head burns. Your limbs tremble. You know that writing your visions brings relief, but only temporarily. The cost is high. Sometimes the pain arrives just before a vision. You come to believe that it is a necessary part of the process. That suffering clears the mind, like wind through smoke. That the darkness prepares the way for light. This is how you live now. In fragments of rest. In flashes of sight. Your sleep is rarely deep. Never uninterrupted. The bell calls you to matins in the middle of the night, long before the sun rises. You chant psalms while your eyes still sting from half-dreams. Then, hours later, you lie down again for a short sleep before dawn. It is never enough. But you do not complain. Sleep is no longer a place of peace. It is a battlefield, a borderland, a waiting room for something greater. And now, people begin to notice. Word of your vision spreads beyond the cloister. Letters arrive. Monks, bishops, and abbots want to know what you've seen. Some believe you, others do not. Even the archbishop sends inquiries. It is dangerous. You are a woman. You are claiming divine authority. But something strange happens. You are not condemned. You are endorsed. Even the Pope Eugenius III reads from civiers aloud in front of the synod of. Tyrant declares your work holy. He tells you to write more. And suddenly, the silence that once protected you is gone. You are no longer hidden. Your visions belong to the world. But they still arrive in the quietest house. They still come in the nights when your bones ache and your skin is cold. You are now the abbess of a growing community. You have moved your nuns to a new monastery on the Rupertsberg. The walls are yours, the rhythm is yours, and yet the rhythm of sleep remains broken. It is not just the rule of Saint Benedict or the demands of midnight prayer. It is the weight of vision, the toll of obedience. Sometimes you wonder what it would feel like to sleep through a night, to drift into darkness without fire or voice. But that is not your path. Your sleep was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be open. A doorway, a flame. A whisper that says, write what you see, and so you do. Again and again. For years to come. You will continue to rise in the dead of night, not from fear or restlessness, but from a command stronger than fatigue. You will lie down knowing you may not stay down for long, that even in slumber, your soul listens, that even in sleep, the voice may call, and that is why you no longer fear the interruption. Because for you, sleep has never been an escape. It has always been an invitation. You are a novice monk in the monastery of Cluny, and the year is 1119. The stone walls are thick, and the halls echo with every footfall. Silence is the rule, not just of the tongue but of the mind. You rise before the stars have faded and sleep only when the bells permit, and even then, sleep is not something you trust. It is not a gentle act. It is not rest for the weary. It is a danger, a vulnerability, a time when the devil whispers and the soul may wander. You are told to fear dreams, to guard your sleep with prayer, and to cleanse your thoughts before lying down. If you do not, your dreams may betray you. You are not alone in this belief. Across Christendom, sleep is watched. It is examined. The content of your dreams could mark you as touched by God or tempted by Satan. And no one, not even the saints, are exempt. You remember being told about Saint Benedict, the founder of your rule, who once saw the soul of a monk leave his body in the form of a glowing orb. The monk had died in his sleep. Peaceful, they said, but also exposed. Death in sleep meant judgment without warning. You are instructed to confess any dreams you remember, especially if they are troubling. Did you dream of violence, lust, food in excess? Did you laugh in your sleep, or speak aloud? Were you seen writhing under your blankets, or moaning in the dark? All of this could be recorded by the older monks, who sit and watch the dormitory at night under the pretense of prayer. They say it is for your safety. That sleep is a liminal place, a testing ground of virtue. But in truth, you are being monitored. Not just for heresy, but for weakness, for excess, for sin. The beds are close together. Simple pallets of straw or rough wool on wooden frames, lined up in a cold stone room like coffins waiting to be filled. You are not allowed to sleep naked. You wear your habit, tied and wrapped even in slumber, so that if death comes suddenly, your body is not indecent. You must lie on your back or side not face down, for that position is thought to inflame lust. You must not cover your face or sleep too deeply. Too much rest is considered sloth, a gateway to demonic temptation. You are awakened at regular intervals by the bells, called to matins and lauds, even in the heart of night. If you yawn too much during the liturgy, it is noticed. If you seem groggy, you are given penance. Sleep must be a service to God. It must be disciplined, denied, if necessary. You remember hearing of monks who claimed they no longer slept at all who stood upright through the night in prayer, barely blinking, claiming that true holiness meant resisting rest. One monk, it is said, tied himself to a column with ropes to keep from falling when he nodded off. Others used stones beneath their backs or splinters pressed into their hands to maintain awareness. And while those extremes are not required of you, they are respected, celebrated. You are told that sleep, like the flesh, must be tamed. But you are young, and your body still resists. At night you sometimes dream of your village, of your mother's voice, of laughter and warm bread, and a time before the silence. You wake ashamed, and sure if the dream itself was sinful. You try not to remember. Memory is dangerous. Even your thoughts are watched in some monasteries. The abbot requires full reports of your sleep. In others, you must kneel and confess your dreams during morning chapter meetings. There are books in the scriptorium that describe how to interpret dreams texts that trace their meaning back to the Bible, to Daniel and Joseph, but these are not for you. They are tools of spiritual judgment, not curiosity. If your dreams are too vivid, too emotional, you may be told to fast, to scourge yourself, to recite extra psalms before sleep. A restless night is your own fault, an overindulgent meal, a wandering thought, a failure of faith, and so you grow anxious at bedtime. You pray longer than the others, you lie stiller. You try not to breathe too deeply. You want sleep to come without images, without movement, without danger. And yet it does not. The mind is wild in darkness. Sometimes you hear others in their beds mutter, a gasp, a cry stifled in the throat. You pretend not to notice. So do the others. But you all feel the tension. Sleep is not your own. It belongs to the rule, to the church, to the eye that never closes. And then there's the matter of dreams from above. Once, an older monk dreamed of angels who whispered secrets in his ear. He told the abbot. Days later, he was reassigned. You never saw him again. Perhaps he was lying. Perhaps he was believed. Either way, it is not for you to ask. In rare cases, dreams are seen as divine gifts, visions, like those of Hildegard or the old prophets. But those are rare, and never encouraged. Most dreams are just traps, echoes of sin. It is better not to speak of them. Better to forget. The irony is that your sleep is shorter, more disturbed, and yet you long for it more than anything. It becomes the secret hunger of your body, the thing you desire but cannot fully have. And so, your mind finds ways to cope. You begin to dream with your eyes open, daydreams that drift like smoke during long hours of copying texts. You imagine fields, running water, the warmth of a sunlit afternoon. You imagine sleep that it might have been in your childhood without fear, without judgment, just stillness, breath, darkness. But then the bell rings, and you rise, another service, another vigil, another night where sleep will come in slivers. Dreams must be strangled before they bloom. In this world, even rest is penance, and you obey. A part of you wonders what if sleep was meant to heal, not punish. What if the dreams are not the danger, but the doorway? You are not a peasant, not a monk, not even a merchant. You are a king, the crowned head in the late medieval world, perhaps in France or England, or the Holy Roman Empire, and even your sleep must serve a purpose. It is not merely rest, it is a demonstration, a performance, a political act. You sleep in a chamber that echoes with carved stone, with frescoes, with polished wood that smells of wax and incense. Your bed is a grand object for poster, heavy with tapestries, surrounded by silks and furs, raised high above the floor as though sleep itself must ascend. But you do not sleep alone. Not really. The notion of privacy is foreign to your time, especially for one of your rank. A servant may lie on the floor at your feet. A groom may doze near the hearth. Chamberlains hover beyond the curtain, alert to your every breath. Some kings are even required to have witnesses to their sleep. The royal body is never truly off duty. It must be seen, protected, even documented. Where you sleep, with whom, and when all of it is of public concern. If you are married, your bed is a matter of dynastic importance. There may be witnesses to your bedding ceremony, sheets inspected, rituals performed, even years after your wedding. People will speculate whether you and your queen still share a bed, and what that means for succession, for alliances, for the realm itself. But sleep is not always shared. Many kings and queens sleep apart, for reasons both practical and symbolic. Some fear poison. Others claim piety or illness. In truth, sleep is one of the only private things left to you, except, of course, that it isn't. Not really. Your dreams are of interest to the court. If you speak in your sleep, the scribe might record it. If you cry out, rumors spread by morning. Some kings have prophetic dreams, or claim to. Others consult astrologers to interpret the symbols that haunt them in the night. Your sleep becomes part of your myth, your legacy. You know of kings who reportedly saw visions of saints or omens of battle while resting. These stories shape how they are remembered. Some are feared for it, others worshipped. There is an entire economy around your sleep. Artisans make embroidered nightshirts, perfumed pillows, carved bed frames. Servants must warm the linens with irons, fluff the mattress of hay or down, and tuck you in with the same reverence given to a relic. Physicians recommend tonics or charms too. Encourage restful dreams. Priests offer blessings before bed. You might keep holy relics. Nearby bones of saints or crosses soaked in oil. These are not comforts. These are protections, because the night, even for a king, is full of danger. There are stories of assassins slipping in by candlelight, of nightmares so powerful they cause strokes or fevers, of kings who never woke up, and so you. Watch the flames in your chamber dance low, hoping they burn till dawn. You try to quiet your thoughts, but they run wild. Taxes, rebellions, treaties, betrayals, the weight of crowns. Your mind is rarely still. Some nights you lie awake for hours. Other nights you wake sweating from a dream you do not understand. You are advised not to speak of it. It may be seen as weakness. A fearful king invites ambition. But some rulers do speak of their dreams. Charlemagne was said to have visions, so was Edward the Confessor. Even Richard III claimed prophetic nightmares before battle. The line between sleep and fate is thin for a king. You are not allowed to ignore it. And then there is the ritual of waking. You do not simply rise and stretch. There is a protocol. A servant gently announces the hour. Curtains are drawn. Water is brought. A prayer is spoken. The chamberlain records your mood. Were you restless? Were you disturbed? Even your first words of the day may be weighed for their tone. You dress slowly, layer by layer, before the court appears. Some kings stage this like a ceremony. The lever du roi, they call it in France the king's rising. Attendance is an honor. A place at the royal bedside signifies favor. Even your sleep becomes a spectacle of power. But sometimes, rarely, you are truly alone. In the dead of winter, when the wind howls and the fire dies low, you may find yourself awake in the small hours, the silence unbroken. You lie beneath a fur-lined coverlet and stare at the beams above your head. And you remember that you, too, are mortal. You, too, must surrender to sleep. That in this one act, you are like every other soul in your kingdom, vulnerable, dreaming, forgotten for a moment. By the world, you wonder what they dream you are peasants, you are knights, your enemies. Do they see your face? Do they curse it? Or do they sleep more soundly, their bellies full of stew, their minds clear of governance? You envy them briefly, but kings do not admit such things. You close your eyes. You try not to imagine your brother's claim to the throne, your cousin's alliance with your rival. You try not to remember the prophecy the bishop whispered years ago about blood in the moonlight. You tell yourself that sleep is rest, not reckoning. But a part of you knows better. You drift, finally, into that place between breath and darkness. Your crown set aside, but never truly forgotten. And in the stillness of your great, cold chamber, with its velvet drapes and sacred icons, you dream not of glory or conquest, but of running water, of a field in spring, of a life unlived. And when you wake, no one will know, except perhaps the man at the foot of your bed, who never quite sleeps, the one who watches, the one who waits, because even kings are watched when they dream. Sleeping in the Middle Ages wasn't as simple as lying down and drifting off. In fact, it was anything but. When the sun disappeared behind the trees and torches flickered against timber walls, the medieval world transformed into a realm of shadows, superstition, and spiritual unease. Nightfall wasn't just darkness, it was danger. You, a humble peasant or merchant, would finish your evening meal in candlelight, perhaps some stew if lucky, bread if not, and prepare for bed not with relief, but with a cautious, almost ritualistic dread. Sleep was a strange and spiritual business, deeply entangled with religion, folklore, and fears that have long faded from our modern view. Your first task would be to protect your soul. The bed was no sanctuary. It was a threshold. You might sprinkle holy water around the chamber, or tuck a small relic, perhaps a splinter of wood said to be from a saintess coffin, under your pillow. You would recite your evening prayers, not just for a blessing, but for protection, especially from the horrors believed to come in the night. The Morrow was one such terror, a shadowy creature from Germanic and Scandinavian folklore that visited in the dark hours, sitting upon your chest and squeezing the breath from your lungs. Today, we call it sleep paralysis. Then, it was spiritual assault, and it wasn't just northern peasants who feared it. Across much of Europe, sleep was understood as a time of vulnerability, when witches might slip through the cracks of consciousness and demons might whisper lies into your dreams. These weren't just metaphors, these were real to the medieval mind, embedded in sermons, manuscripts, and the whispered stories told before the fire died. To prevent these attacks, you might place iron scissors beneath your bed or draw protective signs above your doorway using chalk or even animal blood. Many believed that sleeping with your head facing east, the direction of Jerusalem, would keep evil spirits away. Beds were moved and positioned accordingly. You might even avoid sleeping at certain times of the year, especially during religious feasts, equinoxes, or eclipses when spiritual activity was thought to be at its peak. But perhaps your greatest fear, greater even than demons or witches, was dying in your sleep. The Mordsubite sudden death at night was a terrible prospect, not just because of its finality, but because it left no time for confession, no last rites, no absolution. To die and shriven was to risk your eternal soul. So many slept lightly, or not at all. Monks and laymen alike composed special prayers to guard their souls in sleep. Children were taught to pray not just for peace, but for deliverance from night terrors, both physical and spiritual. "If I should die before I wake" wasn't just a poetic phrase. It was a very real concern. Dreams themselves were not just subconscious flickers, but messages from another world. A goat in your dream could mean betrayal. A flood might signify divine punishment. Dreams were studied, catalogued, interpreted with painstaking care. Books like the Somniel Danielis, a widely circulated dream dictionary, listed dozens of symbols and their meanings. Nobles consulted dream interpreters. Monks meditated on their visions for hours. If you dreamed of being chased by fire, or drowning, or flying, you might seek a priest's guidance the very next morning. Meanwhile, the act of sleepwalking was often interpreted as a spiritual disturbance. The sleepwalker might be cursed or under the influence of a malevolent spirit. Some believed witches could steal parts of your soul while you slept, sending your body wandering in the night like an empty shell. Others claimed that such nocturnal movements were signs of unresolved sin. Remedies ranged from cold water and loud bells to more extreme measures tying the sleeper to their bed, or surrounding them with protective herbs. And then there was the concern of the bed itself. It wasn't merely a frame and a mattress. It was often considered a holy space, or in more anxious homes, a battleground. Herbal mixtures, lavender, chamomile, rosemary were sprinkled into the straw to ward off insects, yes, but also evil spirits. Some even whispered charms or psalms while turning the mattress. You'd rarely sleep alone, not just for warmth, but for protection. Entire families often crammed into one bed, or a series of straw piles on the floor. Children nestled next to parents, sometimes with livestock not far away, especially in winter. This closeness wasn't just economic, it was spiritual. You were safer in numbers. You were watched, even as you dreamed. And not all beds were equal. The noble bed, with its heavy canopy and thick curtains, became its own universe, isolated from drafts and wandering eyes, but also from spirits, supposedly. These curtains weren't just about privacy, they were barriers, symbolic and literal, between you and the dark. But for the average person, your bed was a simple sack of straw, or if lucky, a wooden platform raised slightly from the floor. Perhaps you had a pillow, perhaps not. Sleep would come in two shifts. The first sleep, from sunset until about midnight, then a period of wakefulness often used for prayers, quiet conversation, or even checking livestock, followed by the second sleep, which took you into the early dawn. This segmented sleep wasn't just common, it was expected. In this period of wakefulness, many believed, dreams became most potent. It was a sacred liminal space between night and morning, between the spiritual and the earthly, the stars above, visible through thatched roof gaps or shuttered windows, were seen as eyes of angels, or sometimes as silent witnesses to your nightly battles. And of course, the church kept watch as well. Bells rang through the night in monasteries, calling monks to matins, the midnight prayer, breaking their sleep into intervals of devotion. For some, this constant interruption was holy. For others, it was exhausting. But either way, it shaped the medieval conception of rest not as escape, but as duty. To sleep was to risk, to wake was to give thanks, and to dream. That was never just dreaming. You weren't alone in the dark. The night breathed with you. If you had lived in the medieval world, sleep wouldn't just be something you did, it would be something you observed, a practice shaped by customs, superstitions, and beliefs that defined your relationship with time, the body, and the divine. In noble halls, monasteries, peasant cottages, and even merchant homes, sleep was deeply tied to culture. And some of those practices seem utterly bizarre to us now. Let's begin with segmented sleep, what scholars today call biphasic sleep. In the Middle Ages, it was common to sleep into distinct phases, the first sleep and the second sleep. You would go to bed shortly after nightfall, wake up a few hours later, usually around midnight, and then return to bed for a second phase that lasted until dawn. The time between the two sleeps, known as the watch, was a curious slice of the night. It was often spent in prayer, quiet contemplation, stoking the fire, or even intimacy. In many documents from the 13th to the 16th centuries, people write about this wakeful period as a time of clarity, reflection, or even divine inspiration. The human body was believed to be more spiritually receptive during this middle of the night window. Doctors advised using it to treat illness or reflect on one's sins. Midwives took advantage of the calm, steady state to deliver children, and peasants, after a long day's labor, might finally have time to speak softly with their spouses or check on animals before the frost set in. But this sleep schedule wasn't merely personal, it was social. Church bells rang through the night in monasteries to call monks to their midnight prayers. In towns and cities, some would use this interval to tend to small tasks, patching clothing, whispering confessions, or writing. There are records of scholars and scribes using the time to copy texts by candlelight, believing their minds were most alert then. The medieval world understood the night not as a dead zone, but as a breathing rhythm of rest and quiet movement. And even when you returned to bed, your sleep was not necessarily uninterrupted. The night was full of noises, creaking beams, howling dogs, mice scuttling through straw, and spiritual anxieties. The devil, many believed, was especially active at night. When the soul was adrift in dreams, a monk might dream of women and wake in guilt. A noble woman might dream of falling and consider it an omen of death. These weren't idle fancies, they were treated as significant, often requiring confession or even penance. Then there were protective charms used specifically. During sleep, in some regions of France, families would hang bunches of dry herbs, particularly St. John's wort, vervain, or mugwort above the bed to ward off nightmares or demonic visitations. In Anglo-Saxon England, charms were sometimes stitched into pillows or written on scraps of parchment and tucked into bedding. These included Latin prayers, runic inscriptions, or symbolic drawings meant to act as spiritual shields. Even the church participated in these habits. Monastic sleep schedules were notoriously fragmented, driven by strict adherence to the divine officer cycle of prayers that divided the night into intervals. A monk might sleep from 8 p.m. to midnight, then wake for matins, pray for over an hour, return to bed, and wake again before dawn for lauds. These cycles weren't just spiritual, they rewired the body's rhythms. Chronic sleep deprivation became, paradoxically, a holy pursuit. In extreme cases, saints and mystics claimed to have given up sleep entirely, surviving only on divine light. Catherine of Siena reportedly slept less than an hour per night in her later years, sustained, she said, by prayer alone. And yet, for many in the laity, sleep was a family affair. You likely didn't sleep alone unless you were very wealthy. Most peasants shared their bedsparents with children, siblings with siblings, and occasionally even guests. Beds were scarce, expensive, and large enough to fit multiple people out of necessity. This led to what modern scholars call communal sleep, where sleep was a shared social event. People not only shared warmth, but also stories, dreams, and fears. Privacy was minimal. If you had a bad dream, chances were someone else heard you mutter in your sleep. If someone snored, you had no escape. This closeness also shaped the way people understood sleep. The idea of deeply personal, uninterrupted rest was alien to them. Night was loud, crowded, sometimes cold, and very much alive. For children, lullabies weren't always soft comforts, they were warnings. English lullabies from the 15th century speak of goblins and grim reapers lurking outside the window, urging children to be still or risk being taken. And yet, for all its strangeness, the medieval sleep experience was profoundly intentional. The moment of lying down was prepared for. Feet were washed. Candles were snuffed carefully. Fireplaces were banked. Prayers were recited in bed, not before. Some liturgical books even contain instructions for bed prayers, including gestures and breathing rhythms. In certain Germanic traditions, it was customary to say the name of every archangel as you pull the blanket over your chest, asking for each one's specific protection. Michael for strength, Gabriel for dreams, Raphael for healing. Even the humble pillow had spiritual significance. In some medieval burial customs, people were interred with small pillows as though laying down for eternal rest. For the living, the way the head lay at its tilt, its elevation was thought to influence not just comfort, but moral character. Sleeping flat on your back might make you more prone to sinful dreams. Sleeping curled up with hands over the chest was seen as humble and devout, and when illness struck, sleep became a form of diagnosis. Physicians believed that too much sleep could signal melancholia or demonic possession. Not enough could mean an imbalance of the humors. A doctor might examine your dreams and prescribe prayer, purgatives, or even bleeding to restore your natural sleep cycle. One medieval medical text even warned against sleeping on the left side of the body, which was thought to compress the liver and lead to impure dreams. If you were wealthy, you might own a feather mattress. If not, you slept on straw, reeds, or even sacks filled with leaves. Some laid furs beneath them in winter, and even nobles often wore nightcaps to trap warmth. And yes, nightshirts long, loose garments were common, even among peasants. They weren't just for modesty. They protected the body from lice, chills, and, superstitiously, wandering spirits. There were also rules about when to sleep and when not to. The church discouraged excessive napping, claiming it led to sloth and moral decay. But in hot climates, Midday siestas were common, and travelers often wrote about how different cultures, particularly in southern Europe and parts of the Islamic world, structured their sleep around the sun's intensity. What one culture called laziness, another called survival. So sleep, far from being an afterthought, was embedded in the medieval worldview. It was tied to theology, morality, community, and fear. You didn't just rest. You entered a sacred and vulnerable state, one that demanded protection, preparation, and prayer. And every time you closed your eyes, you did so not just with the hope of rest, but with the silent prayer that you would wake again. Imagine you are a guest at a royal court in the late medieval period, perhaps the court of Charles V of France or Edward III of England, and the hour grows late. The music in the great hall quiets, the torches burn lower, and the noble company begins to retire. But for the king or queen, going to bed is not simply about resting. It is ceremony, it is protocol, it is power. The royal bedchamber is more than a place to sleep, it is a stage, a symbol, a sacred and political space. The bed itself is not a simple straw mattress in the corner of a room, as a peasant might know, but a grand elevated structure of wood and fabric carved, painted, gilded, and hung with heavy curtains of velvet or silk. It stands high off the ground, accessible only by steps. The mattress may be stuffed with down feathers and covered in fine linen scented with lavender or rose, but the luxury is not for comfort alone. It is for display. The king's bedchamber is not entirely private. Attendants are always nearby. Often within the room itself, a valet may stand at the ready to draw the curtains. A caberu may bring spiced wine. A servant may carry a warming pan across the sheets. Some kings have chroniclers, chamberlains, even noblemen in attendance during bedtime, not just for safety, but to observe and record the royal presence. Sleep is not just a necessity, it is an extension of sovereignty. For French kings, there is the lever and the coucher, the rising and the retiring. These are formal events, attended by select courtiers. Being present when the king goes to bed is an honor, an invitation to the inner circle of trust. Even the order in which a man is allowed to hand the king his nightshirt or remove his shoes is dictated by hierarchy. These rituals reinforce loyalty and obedience. When the king sleeps, the realm rests with him. But not all kings sleep alone. The royal bed is also the site of dynastic duty. Marriages are consummated here, sometimes with witnesses just outside the curtain, sometimes with full ceremony. In the case of an heir, the bedding may be witnessed, the linens checked, and the event recorded. When a queen gives birth, it is often in or near the royal bed. Sleep and sex and statecraft are entangled. But privacy, even for a king, is a fragile thing. There are always ears nearby. Servants sleeping on pallets at the foot of the bed. Guards outside the chamber door. Spies among the staff. If the king tosses and turns, someone hears it. If he speaks in his sleep, it may be repeated. If he cries out, rumors spread before dawn. Even dreams become political. Medieval people believed dreams could be messages from God or warnings from the devil. A king's dreams might be interpreted by astrologers or theologians. A vision of blood or fire could signal war. A dream of peace or harvest might bring hope. Some kings embraced their dreams, even using them to justify policy or war. Others feared them, refusing to speak of what they saw. There are stories of kings who woke weeping, who refused to sleep for days before battle, who dreamed of death and were dead by morning. And then there's the fear of assassination. The royal bedchamber must be secure, doors locked, guards rotated, food and drink tested. There are tales of kings poisoned in their sleep, smothered with pillows, stabbed in the dark. That is why some kings sleep lightly, with one eye open, a sword nearby, and a trusted servant always within reach. The queen's bedchamber, though separate, is no less scrutinized. A noble woman's rest is bound by ritual and risk. Her bed may be a refuge or a cage. She may be expected to entertain, to receive messages, even to discuss affairs of state while reclining. If she is pregnant, she may enter confinement, a period of isolation and preparation that turns the bedroom into a sacred, secretive space. Her sleep is monitored. Her dreams, if she speaks of them, may be seen as omens for the child. Sleep in the royal context is never just sleep. It is a carefully curated part of the political image. Bedding becomes a diplomatic tool. To share a bed with a powerful ally or to deny one is a statement. In some courts, nobles share beds to foster trust. In others, only blood relatives or spouses are allowed near the royal rest. Even the fabrics matter. The presence of ermine, of gold thread, of heraldic embroidery, all of it reinforces status. And yet, beneath the layers of protocol and pomp, there is still the human body. The royal sleeper still aches, still sweats, still suffers dreams and insomnia. There are records of kings who struggled to rest, whose minds, like their kingdoms, were too chaotic to quiet. Physicians prescribed remedies, herbs like valerian or poppy, warm milk. Readings from the Psalms. In some cases, kings turned to prayer. In others, they wandered the halls in silence, lost in thought. Still others held midnight councils, unable to wait until dawn. The night was long, and the burden of a crown never fully lifted. Sometimes, kings dreamed of things they could not speak aloud, of failure, of betrayal, of ordinary life. There are stories, whispered in the back halls of castles, of rulers who dreamed they were poor, or lost, or unknown. Some called these dreams curses, others saw them as divine warnings. Either way, the court took notice, for in a world where everything is symbolic, even the dreams of a king are part of the historical record. And when the king finally sleeps, his household sleeps with him. The torches dim, the guards shift. The night settles over the palace like a velvet shroud. But no one is ever fully at rest. Someone is always listening, watching, waiting for the moment the royal eyes close. And when they open again, the cycle begins anew. Morning prayers, morning reports. The lever. The day begins. But for a brief span, in the darkness, between the last candle and the first bell, the king was just a man in a bed, breathing in the quiet, suspended between duty and dream. If you had lived as a monk or a nun in the medieval world, your nights would not have belonged to you. Sleep was not seen as a right or a comfort, it was a concession, a necessary interruption between acts of devotion. In the cold stone dormitories of a Benedictine monastery or a Cistercian abbey, where silence echoed like a second language, sleep was structured, limited, and always subject to the rule of St. Benedict, followed by most Western monastic communities, dictated nearly every hour of the day, and that included the hours of the night. The idea was simple. The body must be subdued so that the soul might rise. Sleep was a physical need, but also a spiritual risk. Too much sleep led to sloth. Too little led to madness. The balance was found in discipline. You would sleep in a long, shared dormitory, perhaps alongside 20 or 30 other monks in rows of wooden pallets or plain straw-filled mattresses. There were no walls, no privacy, only a collective commitment to stillness. The beds were not soft, The blankets, then. Often, you slept in your robe, a woolen habit that scratched your skin and reminded you not to grow too comfortable. The room was unheated. Even in winter, the air could bite. But that was the point. Earthly suffering prepared the soul. Sleep began only after Compline the final prayers of the day. You would recite psalms, chant hymns, bow your head, and then file silently to bed. But it wasn't a full night's rest. You would sleep only a few hours before being roused again, usually sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. For matins, the first of the night offices, a bell would ring through the stone corridors, calling you from the fragile warmth of your bed, in the darkness, barefoot or sandaled. You would move toward the chapel. No words. Only movement. Lanterns flickering, the cold settling in your bones. In the chapel, you would stand or kneel, sometimes for an hour or more, chanting psalms in Latin, your voice joining the others in steady rhythm. The prayers were long, the silence afterward longer. Some monks nodded off while kneeling. Others fought fatigue by biting their tongues or digging their nails into their palms. After matins, you might return to bed or you might stay up, depending on the season and the order. In winter, you might sleep another 2 or 3 hours before the bell for a Lord's rang just before dawn. In summer, you might go straight into work or study. The night was broken, fragmented. That was intentional. A full, unbroken night's sleep was seen as a luxury of the flesh. In some stricter orders, like the Carthusians, sleep was even more limited. Monks lived in individual cells and were expected to rise multiple times a night for prayer, in solitude. They might sleep in short intervals, never for more than a few hours at a time, in some cases. Their beds were deliberately uncomfortable wood and planks with no mattress, or thin mats over stone. Pillows were rare, and if allowed, were small and firm. Even among the less austere orders, sleep was monitored. Novices who overslept were corrected. Monks who snored too loudly were moved. If someone stirred too often or appeared restless, it might be cause for concern. Was he suffering from temptation, illness, or a troubled conscience? In some monasteries, a senior monk would patrol the dormitory at night, watching, listening. Silence was required. Talking in bed was forbidden. Laughter was discouraged. Everything about sleep was supposed to direct the mind toward humility, obedience, and God. But monks were human. There are quiet records, hidden in commentaries and letters, of monks who struggled to sleep. Some confessed their exhaustion during confession. Others asked for herbal remedies, infusions of chamomile, valerian, or poppy. A few fell asleep during prayers, heads nodding mid-chant. Some were punished for it. Others were simply pitied. Among nuns, sleep followed a similar rhythm, though shaped by slightly different fears. Women's monasteries were more isolated, and the dangers of night fire, illness, childbirth were treated with caution. Nuns also followed the canonical hours, rising in the night for matins, returning for a brief rest, and then rising again before sunrise. Their dormitories were equally spare, their routines equally disciplined. Dreams were taken seriously, and none who dreamed vividly might be asked to recount it to the abbess or the confessor. Some dreams were viewed as divine revelations. Others, especially those involving fear or desire, were seen as signs of spiritual warfare. Demonic dreams were feared. There are medieval texts warning of devils who visited women in their sleep, and prayers meant to guard against them. The boundaries between sleep, spirit, and sin were thin for those in holy orders. Sleep was not just a time to rest, it was a time of vulnerability. The devil, it was believed, struck most easily at night, when the mind was weakened. That is why prayers were said before bed. That is why many monks and nuns slept with crucifixes nearby. That is why sleep was always broken by bells. The sound of the bell wasn't just a schedule. It was a weapon, a shield, a way of calling the soul back to vigilance. Over time, some orders adjusted. The Benedictines moderated their rules in some places, allowing older or ill monks more rest. But the principle remained. Sleep was never the goal. Salvation was, and so the monastic night passed. Not in deep slumber, but in intervals waking, praying, sleeping again, always with one eye on the soul, in the modern world. We think of sleep as a private escape. In the medieval monastery, it was a public act of discipline. Even in darkness, the community was present. Even in silence, the rule was awake. You could lie still in your narrow bed. Feel the cold through your robe. Hear the slow breathing of your brothers round you. And know that you were part of something ancient, ordered, sacred. You did not dream of comfort. You dreamed of heaven. And if you woke before the bell, you waited, because time did not belong to you. Sleep did not belong to you. Your rest was borrowed. Your night was numbered. To be a noble woman in the medieval world meant to live a life both sheltered and exposed, both privileged and tightly controlled. And nowhere was this paradox more evident than in the hours of sleep. Unlike the common peasant who might share a straw pallet with family or livestock, or the monk who slept in a dormitory with 30 others, the noble woman had a bed of her own sometimes, even a chamber of her own. But privacy in the medieval world was never complete. Her bed might be large, with carved wood and embroidered sheets, but it was often shared if not with a husband, then with maids, attendants, children, or even guests. The idea of sleeping entirely alone was rare, even for the elite. And when she did sleep, she did so beneath layers of meaning, social duty, vulnerability, performance, and protection. Her bed was a political space. In castles and manors, noble women's bedchambers were located deep within the private areas of the home, guarded by thick doors, family retainers, and often positioned far from the public areas where men conducted business. This was by design. The female bedchamber was both sanctuary and symbol, a place where heirs were conceived, where reputations were guarded, where alliances could be strengthened or destroyed with a whispered rumor. For the noble woman, sleep was not a retreat from power. It was often where power quietly operated. In some cases, noble women staged their sleep. Receiving guests in bed was not uncommon, especially for queens or ladies of high rank. Draped in silks, reclining against cushions, they might grant an audience while still half cloaked in the suggestion of intimacy. The bed became a throne. The act of lying down, of being seen resting, could be ceremonial. But when the visitors left and the curtains were drawn, the night took on a different mood. Security was a constant concern. Noble women were vulnerable to assault, both political and physical. That's why many slept behind locked doors, with bolts that slid heavy into iron slots. Some had personal guards nearby. Others relied on trusted handmaidens who slept in smaller adjoining rooms, or even at the foot of the bed, in castles under siege or tension. Noble women were sometimes relocated to inner chambers with hidden passages or escape routes. In some places, these guard chambers could double as sleeping quarters, small, austere, and meant for safety above comfort. Despite all this, noble women were still subject to the rhythms of the night. Candles flickered out. The silence of a cold stone chamber could become oppressive in winter. The air inside might freeze breath mid-sentence. Even with thick tapestries on the walls and heavy canopies above the bed, drafts seeped in. Bed warmers filled with hot coals were used to take the edge off. Servants would place them between the sheets before the lady retired, but the warmth faded quickly, and fires were not always maintained through the night for fear of smoke or spark. Many noble women wore nightgowns or slept in their underclothes, sometimes with extra stockings, or even fur-lined slippers if they expected to rise before dawn. Some wore nightcaps not just to preserve their hairstyles, but to keep heat from escaping. In wealthier courts, sleep became a display of refinement. The linen mattered. The bed frames were art. A French noblewoman might sleep on a feather bed with velvet covers. An English countess might have her initials embroidered on her pillowcases. In Italy, noble families competed over whose dowry included the most luxurious bedding. The trousseau, the collection of goods a woman brought into marriage, often included an entire wardrobe of sleep-related items. Yet even with this wealth, sleep could be elusive. Nightmares were taken seriously. Dreams were interpreted. A noble woman who woke screaming might call for a priest. Some slept with religious relics under their pillows, crosses, Saint bones, blessed rings. Others burned herbs or hung protective charms by the window. Sleep, like everything else in a noble woman's life, was tied to her body. If she was of childbearing age, her fertility shaped the household. A missed period might spark gossip. A midnight craving might cause whispers. Noble women were expected to be mothers, and the bed was central to that rule. Pregnancy changed everything. Beds were adjusted. Nighttime routines became rituals. Midwives might be stationed in the adjoining room late in pregnancy. Some noble women even gave birth in their own beds, surrounded by attendants, with husbands barred from entering. And once the child was born, the bed remained a center of activity, nursing, healing, recovery. It was not always restful. It was not always quiet, but for noble women past childbearing age, or those who had taken vows of chastity, the bed became something else entirely, a space of personal ritual. Reading the Psalms before sleep, composing letters by candlelight, listening to lute music or the soft murmurs of gossip from servants. It was a time when the pace of court life slowed, when thoughts could wander. But even then, sleep did not belong entirely to the sleeper. In some courts, noble women's waking and sleeping hours were monitored. Etiquette guides described how late a lady might sleep without seeming lazy. Rising too early might suggest anxiety. Rising too late might suggest indulgence. Everything was measured. Everything was seen. There are accounts of noble women waking before dawn to attend early mass, of staying up late into the night to stitch banners or read romances. Their sleep was stitched into the fabric of family, politics, and faith. Even illness couldn't always guarantee rest. A sick noble woman might be visited by physicians, priests, and relatives, each interrupting her rest to offer care or to judge how close she was to death. Some beds became deathbeds, ornate, looming, heavy with drapes and prayers. To sleep in such a bed was to be reminded of what came after. For many noble women, especially those isolated in remote manors or arranged marriages, sleep might have been the only part of the day that belonged to them. A few stolen hours behind the curtains, a candle burning low, a whisper between pillows, a dream of something different. But even that dream could not escape its frame. The medieval bed, no matter how private, was never free. It was watched, guarded, judged. To be a noble woman was to be on display even in sleep. To sleep like a king in the medieval world was not about peace or comfort. It was about performance, power, and protocol. The royal bed was more than furniture. It was a symbol of authority, a stage for a ritual, and a tightly guarded center of political life. Kings rarely slept alone, and they rarely slept unobserved. From the moment a monarch entered his bedchamber, his sleep became a matter of state. The chamber itself was layered. There was the outer room, where guards or attendants waited. Then, the inner chamber, where the bed sat beneath thick canopies. And often, a smaller inner sanctum still hidden behind tapestries or carved partitions where the king might finally lie down. But even in this most private space, he was not truly alone. Royal servants, called valets of the bedchamber, remained nearby. In some cases, they slept in the same room, ready to respond to the king's needs. Others waited just outside. Rotating in shifts, their loyalty was crucial, their discretion even more so. The bed itself was a work of art. Carved oak or walnut, embroidered hangings, mattresses layered with feathers, wool, or straw, linen sheets replaced frequently, often perfumed. Some kings insisted on sleeping under the same set of sheets only once. Others preferred layers of velvet or ermine, depending on the season. But it wasn't just about comfort, it was about display. When foreign visitors came to court, they were sometimes given tours that included the royal bedchamber. Not to see the king asleep, but to see where he slept, to understand his majesty, to be reminded of his status. And yet, for all its splendor, the royal bed was also a place of political vulnerability. Assassinations in bed were a real fear, which is why kings took precautions. Guards outside the door, locked bolts, secret escape passages. Some kings changed beds frequently, rotating between chambers so no one could predict where he'd sleep next. Others demanded food tasters for the drinks and sweets consumed before bedtime. In especially paranoid reigns, the bed itself might be searched beneath pillows, under the mattress. Behind tapestries, sleep, for a king, was never entirely safe. And then there was the matter of the royal waking. Kings did not simply rise. They were awakened, gently. According to custom, in France, the ceremonial lever du roi, the king's rising was a daily spectacle. Courtiers and nobles gathered to observe or participate in the ritual of the king waking. Washing, dressing, the act of getting out of bed became a public performance, a statement of control and grace. In England, royal mornings were also structured. The king's physicians might take his pulse before he even stood. Letters were read aloud while he sat up in bed. Servants brought in hot water for washing. Everything was timed. Everything had an audience. But what of the king's actual night? His hours between dusk and dawn? Like many of his subjects, a king's sleep was often segmented, what we'd now call biphasic. He might go to bed shortly after dusk, sleep for 4 hours, wake in the middle of the night to read, pray, or speak with a trusted aide, then return to sleep until dawn. These middle night hours were often when secrets were shared, treaties drafted, confessions made, lovers admitted, advisors might be summoned quietly. Decisions that shape kingdoms were sometimes made while the king sat on the edge of his bed. Barefoot and wrapped in a fur-lined robe, the royal bed was also a site of dynasty. Marriages were consummated under watchful eyes. Literally, witnesses were often required to stand outside the bedchamber door, listening for proof of consummation. In some cases, they were even invited to observe part of the ritual. To ensure the marriage was valid, the bed wasn't private, it was political, and once children were conceived, royal beds became cradles of succession. A legitimate heir born in the royal chamber solidified power, a birth outside that setting raised questions. Everything came back to the bed. Illness changed the tone of the royal bed dramatically. A sick king confined to his bed became a symbol of instability. Rumors spread quickly. Who was visiting him? Was he conscious? Was a priest seen entering the chamber? In times of illness, the bed might be surrounded by doctors, bishops, sons, rivals. Sleep became shallow, restless. Death hovered in the folds of the curtains. And if the king died, the royal bed was transformed, again now a sight of mourning. A great canopy might be lowered. Tapers lit. Prayers chanted at the bedside. The king's body lay in state, sometimes on the very bed he'd slept in for years. People came to look, to weep, to calculate their futures. The royal bed didn't just cradle the sleeping body, it contained the entire life of the monarchy. Yet, not all kings approached sleep the same way. Some feared it, others embraced it. There were kings who took sleeping potions mixed by personal alchemists, made from poppy, mandrake, or wine. Others resisted such mixtures, fearing poison more than insomnia. Henry IV of France reportedly suffered from nightmares. Edward I of England travelled with a personal bed frame. Refusing to sleep in unfamiliar beds, Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, staged his bedtime as a public ritual, an evening culture attended by nobles, where the king's retirement became a courtly event. And behind all this ceremony, many kings simply longed for a rest, for a night without dreams, for hours without the weight of crowns or conspiracies. But even in their most vulnerable state curled beneath heavy blankets, the flicker of candlelight dancing across carved bed-posts, they were never just men. They were monarchs. Their sleep, like their rule, was watched, tracked, interpreted. Did the king rise early? He must be diligent. Did he sleep late? He must be sick, or worse, indulgent. Every habit was a message, every sigh a clue. Even snores could be politicized. And perhaps this is the final truth of royal sleep in the medieval world. It was never really sleep. It was theater, a nightly performance behind velvet curtains, beneath golden canopies, with an audience always waiting just outside the door.